Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Mohammed Asad Bilal Fayaz and welcome to this final video of Python for everyone. I'm super excited because this is the last video and you have come a long way. So to celebrate that, actually today's video might be a bit longer. And why is that? Because I want to make sure I define every concept, or at least the essential concept of class within Python. And because they're all linked together, I just wanted to make them into one video rather than 2-3 videos, so it confuses you even more. So let's just get started. If you remember, we talked about in object-oriented programming that you can create your own class, and each class have different methods that you could use and create different objects using the same class, right? So what is class and how do we define a class? So to define a class is simple. All you do is write the name class itself, name of the class, whatever you want to call it, 2 semicolons, and here you define all the methods you want to do within that class. Now that is defining a class in simple terms. But what if you want to use that class? Well, to use that class is even simpler. What you do is you write the name of the object itself, right? It could be different names. And then you just make that equals to the name of the class, and then open and close bracket. That's all. So this is the basic essential concept of class, that you start with class, name of the class, 2 semicolon, define all the methods here, call whatever object you want to call by using this class, and to open and close bracket. Okay, so this is how basically you define a class. But let's just say I want to use an example. Let's say I want to define a class named religion, right? And let me correct that, religion, that's how you spell it, right? And I want to create more than one object. I want to create Islam and name it by calling it my function religion, not function, class. And then maybe I want to also do Christianity, right? And want to give it another same class and call it open and close bracket, and maybe Judaism as well, right? And then call it religion, open and close bracket here, and that's it, right? Let's say I want to do that. Now if I run it now, it won't work because I haven't defined any methods here. But just so that no error comes in, I'll just write pass and run this function here, and you would notice it did it without any error. So what it did is it created 3 objects: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, using the same class religion. What if I want to define something in there? Now before I move to complicated things, let's say I want to define it as a message, and the message is believe in God, right? And messengers, right? Maybe a universal message like that. Now this message is same for all of these classes. Now what do I mean by that? Let's say if I want to do Islam dot, now do you see, as soon as I type in dot, it gives me all the variables or method that are defined within that class itself. I'll say, you know what, give me this message, and for this message, obviously to print it out, I need to actually use a print function, right? Otherwise I can't do it. So let me close them into brackets, and I'm gonna say print this out for me. Let's print this out. There you go. Believe in God and messengers. The problem with this is, if I do this exactly the same for all of these class, Christianity and then Judaism, and run this, all print out exactly the same thing. Well, it's not a problem, it's just kind of boring, because I know, we all know, every religion is different, and what's the point of creating a class if I had to do the same thing over and over again? Could I not just define a variable and then print it? Well, oftentimes you might need a message that needs to be the same in all class. But if you want to create a class with different information all the time, what you do is you define something called initialization. Initialization what it does, it basically, you start with define 2 underscore init and 2 underscore again. Now whenever you are defining anything in class, you have to give first argument as self. Now once I do that, I can say my second argument, that whenever I define a class, has to be a certain message, and I will always have to define my first self dot message, that whatever argument that I give is equals to message. So that's just a way of how we define any function in a class. We have to give the first argument as self. It is a common practice, and it is a part of a class where it calls the actual object of that method. So this is where our argument was. It is actually calling that argument within that class itself. Now what does that do basically? What does that do is basically, in my religion, I wanted to create an object Islam, but for Islam I want to give a different message here, as there is no God but God. For Christianity, believe in Trinity. And for Judaism, I personally don't know that much, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but let's just say, to be on a safe side, believe in God, right? Now interestingly, what happened now is that every time that when I am calling that class itself with a different initialization, every single time it will print out this for me, this particular what do you call it, message, right, which is different. Let me run this so that I can tell you here. Let's say I want to do this message here, print run this function. There you go. So even though everything was same before, but before it was a variable rather than initialization, right? But once I have defined an initialization, it allows me to create an object using the same class, but every time I can create with a different message now. As you can see here, for Islam, there's no God but God, believe in Trinity, and believe in God for Christianity and Judaism respectively. So this is how you can create a representation of it. But let's say you're like, you know what, even though it helps me now to make it more customized, but what if, excuse me, but what if I don't want to call that message function in itself? I want to just call the class, which is this, the object itself, and it should automatically print it for me. For that, you have to define something called representation. Now what does that do is basically you start with def again, 2 underscore bracket repr. Again, remember, whenever you're defining a function in class, it has to start with self. Now what I say is, every time I'm defining an object with a certain message, you should return that particular message itself. Now this helps me by not calling that particular message over and over again. I can just call my object itself, which is Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and if I run that, it automatically bring that representation which I linked it to this message itself. So this is another method that once you're sure that whenever a person wants to call that object, that print function is printed along with it. So this is a common practice and common way of defining class. You start with class, you give the name of the class, then you use initialization, and then you use representation to represent that message. Well, it will still be boring if that's the everything you have to do or you can do in class, but that's not true. You can create any method or as many methods as you want within that particular class, such as in this case I want to say define belief, and for that again remember I have to define it as self, and in this case I'm say print faith and certainty are levels of religion, right? Just something, whatever you want to call it. It has to be print function, it could be a different function itself, it might be calculating a different value if you're working with numbers, so on and so forth. Now let's say I want to say for Islam object, what is the belief, right? Now remember, I don't have to use my print function because the print is already defined in that method itself. So when I run that, the first three are from my this print function. The last one, faith and certainty, are levels of religion printed out itself. And I can do for all sort of things, Judaism dot belief, and run that. It will automatically does that for me. So this is what class is in Python. I know I've covered quite a bit, but that's because I want you to have an idea of what class it, and in the next video when we're doing our live project, you will find it interesting that when we use it in some context, it will make even more sense. So if you have any question, please place down your comments below so we can discuss it. Till then, take care, keep practicing, and goodbye.